Hello there. I'm so glad you could join me in reading Moby Dick by Herman Melville. And today, we're starting from the chapter The Tale. Sit down and have a listen, or stand up or lie down and have a listen, whatever you want to do. Do it, but have a listen to this. Other poets have warbled the praises of the soft eye of the antelope, and the lovely plumage of the bird that never alights. Less celestial, I celebrate a tale. Reckoning the largest size sperm whale's tail to begin at the point of the trunk, where it tapers to about the girth of a man, it comprises upon its upper surface alone an area of at least 50 square feet. The compact round body of its root expands into two broad firm flat palms or flukes, gradually shoaling away to less than an inch in thickness. At the crotch or junction, these flukes slightly overlap, then sideways recede from each other like wings, leaving a wide vacancy between. In no living thing are the lines of beauty more exquisitely defined than in the crescentic borders of these flukes. At its utmost expansion in the full-grown whale, the tail will considerably exceed 20 feet across. The entire member seems a dense webbed bed of welded sinews. But cut into it, and you will find that three distinct strata compose it: upper, middle, and lower. These fibers in the upper and lower layers are long and horizontal, those of the middle one very short and running crosswise between the outside layers. This triune structure, as much as anything else, imparts power to the tail. To the student of old Roman walls, the middle layer will furnish a curious parallel to the thin course of tiles always alternating with the stone in those wonderful relics of the antique, and which undoubtedly contribute so much to the great strength of the masonry. But as if this vast local power in the tendinous tail were not enough, the whole bulk of the Leviathan is knit over with a warp and woof of muscular fibers and filaments, which, passing on either side the loins and running down into the flukes, insensibly blend with them, and largely contribute to their might, so that in the tail the confluent measureless force of the whole whale seems concentrated to a point. Could annihilation occur to matter, this were the thing to do. Nor does this, its amazing strength, at all tend to cripple the graceful flexion of its motions, where infantileness of ease undulates through a titanism of power. On the contrary, those motions derive their most appalling beauty from it. Real strength never impairs beauty or harmony, but it often bestows it, and in everything imposingly beautiful, strength has much to do with the magic. Take away the tied tendons that all over seem bursting from the marble in the curved Hercules, and its charm would be gone, as devout Herman lifted the linen sheet from the naked corpse of Gatti. He was overwhelmed with the massive chest of the man, that seemed as a Roman triumphal arch. When Angelo paints even God the Father in human form, mark what robustness is there. And whatever they may reveal of the divine love in the Son, the soft-curled hermaphroditical Italian pictures, in which his idea has been most successfully embodied, these pictures, so destitute as they are of all brawniness, hint nothing of any power, but the mere negative feminine one of submission and endurance, which on all hands, it is conceded, form the peculiar practical virtues of his teachings. Such is the subtle elasticity of the organ I treat of, that whether wielded in sport or in earnest or in anger, whatever be the mood it be in. Its flexions are invariably marked by exceeding grace. Therein no fairy's arm can transcend it. 5 great motions are peculiar to it. First, when used as a fin for progression. Second, when used as a mace in battle. Third, in sweeping. Fourth, in lobtailing. Fifth, in peaking flukes. First, being horizontal to its position, the Leviathan's tail acts in a different manner from the tails of all other sea creatures. It never wriggles. In man or fish, wriggling is a sign of inferiority. To the whale, his tail is the sole means of propulsion, scroll-wise coiled forwards beneath the body and then rapidly sprung backwards. It is this which gives that singular darting, leaping motion to the monster when furiously swimming. His side fins only serve to steer by. Second, it is a little significant that while one sperm whale only fights another sperm whale with his head and jaw, nevertheless, in his conflicts with man, he chiefly and contemptuously uses his tail. In striking at a boat, he swiftly curves away his flukes from it, and the blow is only inflicted by the recoil, if it be made in the unobstructed air, especially if it descended to its mark. The stroke is then simply irresistible. No ribs of man or boat can withstand it. Your only salvation lies in eluding it. But if it comes sideways through the opposing water, then partly owing to the light buoyancy of the whaleboat and the elasticity of its materials, a cracked rib or a dashed plank or two, a sort of stitch in the side is generally the most serious result. These submerged side blows are so often received in the fishery that they are accounted mere child's play. Some one strips off a frock and the whole is stopped. Third, I cannot demonstrate it, but it seems to me that in the whale the sense of touch is concentrated in the tail, for in this respect there is a delicacy in it only equalled by the daintiness of the elephant's trunk. This delicacy is chiefly evinced in the action of sweeping, when in maidenly gentleness the whale with a certain soft slowness moves his immense flukes from side to side upon the surface of the sea, and if he feel but a sailor's whisker, woe to that sailor, whiskers and all. That tenderness there is in that preliminary touch. Had this tale any prehensile power, it should straightway bethink me of Darmonde's elephant that so frequented the flower market, and with low salutations presented nosegays to damsels, and then caressed their zones. On more accounts than one, a pity it is that the whale does not possess this prehensile virtue in its tail, for I have heard of yet another elephant, that then wounded in the fight curved round his trunk, and extracted the dart. Fourth, stealing unawares upon the whale in the fancied security of the middle of solitary seas, you find him unbent from the vast corpulence of his dignity, and kitten-like he plays on the ocean as if it were a hearth. But still you see his power in his play. The broad palms of his tail are flirted high into the air, then smiting the surface, the thunderous concussion resounds for miles. You would almost think a great gun had been discharged, and if you notice the light wreath of vapor from the spiracle at his other extremity, you would think that was a smoke from the touch-hole. Fifth, as in the ordinary floating posture of the Leviathan, the flukes lies considerably below the level of his back. They are then completely out of sight, beneath the surface. But when he is about to plunge into the deeps, his entire flukes, with at least 30 feet of his body, are tossed erect in the air, and so remain vibrating a moment. till they downwards shoot out of view. What? Alright, that was really creepy. A door just opened on its own. Ow. Anyways. Excepting the sublime breach somewhere. Excepting the sublime breach somewhere else to be described, this speaking of the whale's flukes is perhaps the grandest sight to be seen in all animated nature. I really wish I could see that up front, just once. It's been a long, long time dream of mine. Something in my bucket list. I've never been able to see a whale just, surface and smash the water with its tail and go down. I've seen it in videos countless of times, but up front it would be so majestic. Anyways. Out of the bottomless profundities, the gigantic tail seems spasmodically snatching at the highest heaven. So in dreams have I seen majestic Satan thrusting forth his tormented colossal claw from the flame Baltic of hell. But in gazing at such scenes, it is all in all what mood you are in. If in the Dantean, the devils will occur to you; if in that of Isaiah, the archangels. Standing at the masthead of my ship during a sunrise, that crimson sky and sea, I once saw a large herd of whales in the east, all heading towards the sun, and for a moment vibrating in concert with beaked flukes. As it seemed to me at that time, such a grand embodiment of adoration of the gods was never beheld, even in Persia, the home of the fire worshippers. As Ptolemy Philopater testified to the African elephant, I then testified to the whale, pronouncing him the most devout of all beings. For according to King Jubba, the military elephants of antiquity often hailed the morning with their trunks uplifted in profoundest silence. The chance comparison in this chapter between the whale and the elephant, so far as some aspects of the tail of the one and the trunk of the other are concerned, should not tend to place those two opposite organs of an equality, much less the creatures to which they respectively belong. For as the mightiest elephant is but a terrier to the Leviathan, so compared with Leviathan's tail, this trunk is but the stalk of a lily, the most direful blow from the elephant's trunk, whereas the playful tap of a fan, compared with the measureless crush and crash of the sperm whale's ponderous flukes, which in repeated instances have one after the other hurled entire boats with all their oars and crews into the air, very much as an Indian juggler tosses his balls. Footnote for balls. Through all comparison in the way of general bulk between the whale and the elephant is preposterous, inasmuch as in that particular the elephant stands in much the same respect to the whale that a dog does to the elephant. Nevertheless, there are not wanting some points of curious similitude. Among these is the spout. It is well known that the elephant will often draw up water or dust in his trunk, and then elevating it, jet it forth in a stream. Back to the story now. The more I considered this mighty tail, the more do I deplore my inability to express it. At times there are gestures in it which, though they would well graze the hand of man, remain wholly inexplicable. In an extensive herd so remarkable occasionally are these mystic gestures that I have heard hunters who have declared them akin to Freemasons' signs and symbols, that the whale indeed by these methods intelligently conversed with the world. Nor are there wanting other motions of the whale in his general body, full of strangeness and unaccountable to his most experienced assailant. Dissect him how I may then, I but go skin deep. I know him not, and never will, but if I know not even the tail of this whale, how understand his head? much more how comprehend his face, when face he has none. Thou shalt see my back parts, my tail he seems to say, but my face shall not be seen. But I cannot completely make out his back parts, and hint what he will about his face. I say again, he has no face. The Grand Armada. The long and narrow peninsula of Malacca, extending southeastward from the territories of Burma, forms the most southerly point of all Asia. In a continuous line from that peninsula stretch the long islands of Sumatra, Java, Bali, and Timor, which with many others form a vast mole or rampart lengthwise connecting Asia with Australia, and dividing the long unbroken Indian Ocean from the thickly studded Oriental archipelagos. This rampart is pierced by several sally ports for the convenience of ships and whales, conspicuous among which are the Straits of Sunda and Malacca. By the Straits of Sunda chiefly vessels bound to China from the west emerge into the China seas. Those narrow straits of Sunda divide Sumatra from Java, and standing midway in the vast rampart of islands, but buttressed by that bold green promontory known to seamen as Java Head, they not a little correspond to the central gateway opening into some vast walled empire, and considering the inexhaustible wealth of spices and silks and jewels and gold and ivory with which the 1,000 islands of that oriental sea are enriched, it seems a significant provision of nature that such treasures, by the very formation of the land, should at least bear the appearance, however ineffectual, of being guarded from the all-grasping Western world. The shores of the Stairs of Sunda are unsupplied with those domineering fortresses which guard the entrances to the Mediterranean, the Baltic, and the Propontis. Unlike the Danes, these Orientals do not demand the obsequious homage of lower topsails from the endless procession of ships before the wind, which for centuries past by night and by day have passed between the islands of Sumatra and Java, freighted with the costliest cargoes of the East. But while they freely waive a ceremonial like this, they do by no means renounce their claim to more solid tribute. Time out of mind, the piratical proas of the Malays lurking among the low-shaded coves and islets of Sumatra have sailed out upon the vessels through the straits, fiercely demanding tribute at the point of their spears. Though by the repeated bloody chastisements they have received at the hands of European cruisers, the audacity of these corsairs has of late been somewhat repressed. Yet even at the present day we occasionally hear of English and American vessels which in those waters have been remorselessly boarded and pillaged. With a fair fresh wind the Pequod was now drawing nigh to these straits, Ahab purposing to pass through them into the Javan Sea, and thence cruising northward over waters known to be frequented here and there by the sperm whale, sweep inshore by the Philippine Islands, and gain the far coast of Japan in time for the great whaling season there. By these means the circumnavigating Pequod would sweep among all the known sperm whale cruising ground of the world, previous to descending upon the line in the Pacific, where Ahab, though everywhere else foiled in his pursuit, firmly counted upon giving battle to Moby Dick. In the sea he was most known to frequent, and at a season where he might most reasonably be presumed to be haunting it. But how now? In this zoned quest does Ahab touch no land? Does his crew drink air? Surely he will stop for water. Nay, For a long time now, the circus-running sun has raced within the fiery ring, and needs no sustenance but what's in himself. So Ahab marked this too in the whaler, while other hulls are loaded down with alien stuff to be transferred to foreign wars. The world-wandering whale ship carries no cargo but herself and crew, their weapons, and their wants. She has a whole lake's contents bottled in her ample hold. She is ballasted and with utilities, not altogether with unusable pig-lead and kentalge. No idea what that is. She carries years' water in her, clear old prime Nantucket water, which, when 3 years afloat, the Nantucketer in the Pacific prefers to drink before the brackish fluid, but yesterday rafted off in casks from the Peruvian or Indian streams. Hence it is that, while other ships may have gone to China from New York and back again, touching at a score of ports, the whale ship, in all that interval, may not have sighted one grain of soil, her crew having seen no man but floating seamen like themselves, so that, did you carry them the news of another flood had come, they would only answer, "Well, boys, here's the ark." Now, as many sperm whales had been captured off the western coast of Java in the near vicinity of the Straits of Sunda. Indeed, as most of the ground roundabout was generally recognized by the fishermen as an excellent spot for cruising. Therefore, as the Pequod gained more and more upon Java Head, the lookouts were repeatedly hailed and admonished to keep wide awake. But though the green palmy cliffs of the land soon loomed on the starboard bow, and with delighted nostrils the fresh cinnamon was snuffed in the air, yet not a single jet was descried. Almost renouncing all thought of falling in with any game hereabouts, the ship had well nigh entered the straits, when the customary cheering cry was heard from aloft, and ere long a spectacle of singular magnificence saluted us. But here be it permissed, that, owing to the unwearied activity with which of late they have been hunting over all 4 occasions, the sperm whales, instead of almost invariably sailing in small detached companies, as in former times, are now frequently met with in extensive herds, sometimes embracing so great a magnitude that it would almost seem as if numerous nations of them had sworn solemn league and covenant for mutual assistance and protection. To this aggregation of the sperm whale into such immense caravans may be imputed the circumstance that even in the best cruising grounds you may now sometimes sail for weeks and months together, without being greeted by a single spout, and then be suddenly saluted by what sometimes seems thousands on thousands. Broad on both bows, at the distance of some 2 or 3 miles, and forming a great semicircle, embracing one half of the level horizon, a continuous chain of whale jets were upplaying and sparkling in the noonday air, unlike the straight perpendicular twin jets of the right whale, which, dividing at top, fall over in 2 branches like the cleft dropping boughs of a willow. The single forward slanting spout of the sperm whale presents a thick curled bush of white mist, continually rising and falling away to leeward. Seen from the Pequod's deck, then, as she would rise on a high hill of the sea, this host of vapory spouts individually curling up into the air and beheld, through a blending atmosphere of blush haze, showed like the 1,000 cheerful chimneys of some dense metropolis, descried of a balmy autumnal morning by some horseman on a height. as marching armies approaching an unfriendly defile in the mountains accelerate their march, all eagerness to place that perilous passage in their rear and once more expand in comparative security upon the plain. Even so did this vast fleet of whales now seem hurrying forward through the straits, gradually contracting the wings of their semicircle and swinging on, in one solid but still crescentic center. Crowding all sail, the Pequod pressed after them, and harpooneers handling their weapons and loudly cheering from their heads of their yet suspended boats. If the wind only held, little doubt had they, that chased through these straits of Sunda, the vast host would only deploy into the oriental seas to witness the capture of not a few of their numbers, and who could tell whether in that congregated caravan Moby Dick himself might not temporarily be swimming. Like the worshipped white elephant in the coronation procession of the Siamese, so with stun sail piled on stun sail, we sailed along, driving these leviathans before us, when of a sudden the voice of Tashtego was heard, loudly directing attention to something in our wake. Oh man, action. Corresponding to the crescent in our van, we beheld another in our rear. It seemed formed of detached white vapors, rising and falling sometimes like the spouts of the whales, only they did not so completely come and go, for they constantly hovered without finally disappearing. Leveling his glass at this sight, Ahab quickly revolved in his pivot hole, crying, "Aloft there! And ring whips and buckets to wet the sails! Molest, sir, and after us!" As if too long lurking behind the headlands till the Pequod should fairly have entered the straits, these radically Asiatics were now in hot pursuit to make up for their overcautious delay. But when the swift Pequod, with a fresh leading wind, was herself in hot chase, how very kind of these tawny philanthropists to assist in speeding her on to her own chosen pursuit, mere riding whips and rowels to her, that they were. As with glass underarm, Ahab to and fro paced the deck, in his forward turn beholding the monsters he chased, and in the after one the bloodthirsty pirates chasing him. Some such fancy as the above seemed his, and when he glanced upon the green walls of the watery defile in which the ship was then sailing, and bethought him that through that gate lay the route to his vengeance, and beheld how that through that same gate he was now both chasing and being chased to his deadly end. And not only that, but a herd of remorseless wild pirates and inhuman atheistical devils were infernally cheering him on with their curses. When all these conceits had passed through his brain, Ahab's brow was left gaunt and ribbed, like the black sand beach after some stormy tide had been gnawing at it, without being able to drag the firm thing from its place. But thoughts like those troubled very few of the reckless crew. And when, after steadily dropping and dropping the pirate's astern, the Pequod at last shot by the vivid green Cockatoo Point on the Sumatra side, emerging at last upon the broad waters beyond, then the harpooneers seemed more to grieve that the swift whales had been gaining upon the ship, than to rejoice that the ship had so victoriously gained upon the Malays. But still driving on in the wake of the whales, at length they seemed abating their speed. Gradually the ship neared them, and the wind now dying away, word was passed to spring to the boats. But no sooner did the herd, by some presumed wonderful instinct of the sperm whale, become notified of the 3 keels that were after them, though as yet a mile in their rear, they rallied again, and forming in close ranks and battalions, so that their spouts all looked like flashing lines of stacked bayonets, moving on with redoubled velocity. Stripped to our shirts and drawers, we sprang to the white ash, and after several hours pulling were almost disposed to renounce the chase, when a general pause and commotion among the whales gave animating token that they were now at last under the influence of that strange perplexity of inert irresolution, which, when the fishermen perceive it in the whale, they say, "He is gallied." The compact martial columns in which they had been hitherto rapidly and steadily swimming were now broken up in one measureless rout, and like King Porus's elephants in the Indian battle with Alexander, they seemed going mad with consternation, in all directions expanding in vast irregular circles, and aimlessly swimming hither and thither by their short thick spoutings. They plainly betrayed their distraction of panic. This was still more strangely evinced by those of their number who, completely paralyzed as it were, helplessly floated like waterlogged dismantled ships on the sea. Had these leviathans been but a flock of simple sheep pursued over the pasture by 3 fierce wolves, they could not possibly have evinced such excessive dismay. But this occasional timidity and characteristic of almost all herding creatures, though banding together in tens of thousands, the lion-maned buffaloes of the West have fled before a solitary horseman. Witness, too, all human beings, how, when herded together in the sheepfold of a theatre's pit, they will, at the slightest alarm of fire, rush helter-skelter for the outlets, crowding, trampling, and jamming, and remorselessly dashing each other to death. Best, therefore, withhold any amazement at the strangely gallied whales before us, for there is no folly of the beasts of the earth which is not infinitely outdone by the madness of men. Though many of the whales, as has been said, were in violent motion, yet it is to be observed that as a whole the herd neither advanced nor retreated, but collectively remained in one place, as is customary in those cases. The boats at once separated, each making for some one lone whale on the outskirts of the shoal in about 3 minutes' time. Quickwig's harpoon was flung. The stricken fish darted, blinding spray in our faces, and then, running away with us like light, steered straight for the heart of the herd. Though such a movement on the part of the whale struck under such circumstances is nowise unprecedented, and indeed is almost always more or less anticipated, yet does it present one of the more perilous vicissitudes of the fishery. For, as the swift monster drags you deeper and deeper into the frantic shoal, you bid adieu to circumspect life and only exist in a delirious throb. As blind and deaf, the whale plunged forward as if by sheer power of speed to rid himself of the iron leech that had fastened to him. As we thus tore a wide gash in the sea, on all sides menaced as we flew by the crazed creatures to and fro, rushing about us, our beset boat was like a ship mobbed by ice-isles in a tempest, and striving to steer through their complicated channels and straits, knowing not at what moment it may be locked in and crushed. But not a bit daunted, Quickwig steered us manfully, now sheering off from this monster directly across our route in advance, now edging away from that whose colossal flukes were suspended overhead, while all the time Starbuck stood up in the bows, lance in hand, pricking out of our way whatever whales he could reach by short darts, for there was no time to make long ones, nor were the oarsmen quite idle, though their wonted duty was now altogether dispensed with. they chiefly attended to the shouting part of the business. "Out of the way, Commodore!" cried one to a great dromedary that of a sudden rose bodily to the surface, and for an instant threatened to swamp us. "Hard down with your tail there!" cried a second to another, which, close to our gunwale, seemed calmly cooling himself with his own fan-like extremity. All whaleboats carry certain curious contrivances, originally invented by the Nantucket Indians, called drugs. Two thick squares of wood of equal size are stoutly clenched together, so that they cross each other's grain at right angles. A line of considerable length is then attached to the middle of this block, and the other end of the line being looped, it can in a moment be fastened to a harpoon. It is chiefly among gallied whales that this drug is used. For them, more whales are close round you than you can possibly chase at one time. But sperm whales are not every day encountered. While you may, then, you must kill all you can. And if you cannot kill them all at once, you must wing them, so that they can be afterwards killed at your leisure. Hence it is that at times like these the drug comes into requisition. Our boat was furnished with 3 of them. The first and second were successfully darted, and we saw the whales staggeringly running off, fretted by the enormous sidelong resistance of the towing drug. They were cramped like malefactors, with the chain and the ball. But upon flinging the third, in the act of tossing overboard the clumsy wooden block, it caught under one of the seats of the boat, and in an instant tore it out and carried it away, dropping the oarsman in the boat's bottom as the seat slid from under him. On both sides the sea came in at the wounded planks, but we stuffed 2 or 3 drawers and shirts in, and so stopped the leaks for the time. It had been next to impossible to dart these drugged harpoons, were it not that as we advanced into the herd our whale's way greatly diminished. Moreover, that as we went still further and further from the circumference of commotion, the direful disorders seemed waning, so that when at last the jerking harpoon drew out and the towing whale sideways vanished, then, with the tapering force of his parting momentum, we glided between 2 whales into the innermost heart of the shoal, as if from some mountain torrent we had slid into a serene valley lake. Here the storms in the roaring glens between the outermost whales were heard but not felt. In this central expanse the sea presented that smooth satin-like surface called a sleek, produced by the subtle moisture thrown off by the whale in his more quiet moods. Yes, we were now in that enchanted calm which they say lurks at the heart of every commotion, and still in the distracted distance we beheld the tumults of the outer concentric circles, and saw successive pods of whales, 8 or 10 in each, swiftly going round and round, like a multiplied span of horses in a ring, and so closely shoulder to shoulder, that a Titanic circus rider might easily have overarched the middle ones, and so have gone round on their backs, owing to the density of the crowd of reposing whales, more immediately surrounding the embayed axis of the herd. No possible chance of escape was at present afforded us. We must watch for a breach in the living wall that hemmed us in, the wall that had only admitted us in order to shut us up. Keeping at the center of the lake, we were occasionally visited by small tame cows and calves, the women and children of this routed host. Now, inclusive of the occasional wide intervals between the revolving outer circles, and inclusive of the spaces between the various pods in any one of the circles, the entire area at this juncture embraced by the whole multitude, must have contained at least 2 or 3 square miles. At any rate, though indeed such a test at such a time might be deceptive, spoutings might be discovered from our low boat that seemed playing up almost from the rim of the horizon. I mention this circumstance because, as if the cows and calves had been purposely locked up in the innermost fold, and as if the wide extent of the herd had hitherto prevented them from peering the precise cause of this stopping, or possibly being so young, unsophisticated, and every way innocent and inexperienced. However it may have been, these smaller whales, now and then visiting our becalmed boat from the margin of the lake, evinced a wondrous featurelessness and confidence, or else a still becharmed panic, which it was impossible not to marvel at. Like household dogs, they came snuffing round us, right up to our gunwales, and touching them, till it almost seemed that some spell had suddenly domesticated them. Quig, patting their foreheads, Starbuck scratching their backs with his lance, but fearful of the consequences, for the time refrained from darting it. But far beneath the wondrous world upon the surface, another and still stranger world met our eyes as we gazed over the side. For suspended in those watery vaults floated in the form of the nursing mothers of the whales, and those that, by their enormous girth, seemed shortly to become mothers. The lake, as I have hinted, was to a considerable depth exceedingly transparent, and as human infants while suckling will calmly and fixedly gaze away from the breast, as if leading 2 different lives at the time, and while yet drawing mortal nourishment, be still spiritually feasting upon some unearthly reminiscence, even so did the young of these whales seem looking up towards us, but not at us, as if we were but a bit of gulfweed in their newborn sight. Floating on their sides, the mothers also seemed quietly eyeing us. One of these little infants that, from certain queer tokens, seemed hardly a day old, might have measured some 14 feet in length and some 6 feet in girth. He has a little frisky, though as yet his body seems scarce yet recovered from the irksome position it had so lately occupied in the maternal reticule, where tail to head and all ready for the final spring, the unborn whale lies bent like a Tartar's bow. The delicate side fins and the palms of his flukes still freshly retained the plaited, crumpled appearance of a baby's ears newly arrived from foreign parts. "Line! Line!" cried Quig, looking over the gunwale.
Him fast! Him fast! Who line him? Who struck? 2 whale, 1 big, 1 little. What else, ya man?
cried Starbuck.
Looky here,
said Quig, pointing down, as when the stricken whale that from the tub was reeled out hundreds of fathoms of rope, as after deep sounding he floats up again and shows the slackened curling line buoyantly rising and spiraling towards the air. So now Starbuck saw long coils of the umbilical cord of Madame Leviathan, by which the young cub seemed still tethered to its dam. Not seldom in the rapid vicissitudes of the chase, this natural line with the maternal end loose becomes entangled with the hempen one, so that the cub is thereby trapped. Some of the subtlest secrets of the seas seem divulged to us in this enchanted pond. We saw young Leviathan, amorous in the deep. Footnotes over here. The sperm whale, as with all other species of the Leviathan, but unlike most other fish, breeds indifferently at all seasons, after a gestation which may probably be set down at 9 months, producing but one at a time, though in some few known instances giving birth to an Esau and Jacob, a contingency provided for in suckling by two teats, curiously situated, one on each side of the anus. But the breasts themselves extend upwards from that. When by chance these precious parts in a nursing whale are cut by the hunter's lance, the mother's pouring milk and blood rivalingly discolored the sea for rods. The milk is very sweet and rich. It has been tasted by man. It might do well with strawberries. When overflowing with mutual esteem, the whales salute more hominum. And thus, back to the story by the way, and thus, though surrounded by circle upon circle of consternations and affrights, did these inscrutable creatures at the center freely and fearlessly indulge in all peaceful concernments, yea, serenely revelled in dalliance and delight. But even so, amid the tornadoed Atlantic of my being, do I myself still forever centrally disport in mute calm, and while ponderous planets of unwaning woe revolve around me, deep down and deep inland, there I still bathe me in eternal mildness of joy. Meanwhile, as we thus lay entranced, the occasional sudden frantic spectacles in the distance evince the activity of other boats, still engaged in drugging the whales on the frontier of the host, or possibly carrying on the war within the first circle, where abundance of room and some convenient retreats were afforded them. But the sight of the enraged drugged whales now and then blindly darting to and fro across the circles was nothing to what at last met our eyes. It is sometimes the custom when fast to a whale more than commonly powerful and alert, to seek to hamstring him, as it were by sundering or maintaining his gigantic tail tendon. It is done by darting a short-handed cutting spade to which is attached a rope for hauling it back again. A whale wounded, as we afterwards learned in this part, but not effectually, as it seemed, had broken away from the boat, carrying along with him half of the harpoon line, and in the extraordinary agony of the wound, he was now dashing among the revolving circles like the lone mounted desperado. Arnold at the Battle of Saratoga, carrying dismay wherever he went. But agonizing as was the wound of this whale, and appalling spectacle enough anyway, yet the peculiar horror with which he seemed to inspire the rest of the herd was owing to a cause which at first the intervening distance obscured from us. But at length we perceived that by one of the unimaginable accidents of the fishery, this whale had become entangled in the harpoon line that he towed. He had also run away with a cutting spade in him, and while the free end of the rope attached to that weapon had permanently caught in the coils of the harpoon line around his tail, the cutting spade itself had worked loose from his flesh, so that tormented to madness, he was now churning through the water, violently flailing with his flexible tail, and tossing the keen spade about him, wounding and murdering his own comrades. This terrific object seemed to recall the whole herd from their stationary fright. First, the whales forming the margin of our lake began to crowd a little, and tumble against each other, as if lifted by half-splent billows from afar. Then the lake itself began faintly to heave and swell. The submarine bridal chambers and nurseries vanished. In more and more concentrating orbits, the whales in the more central circles began to swim in thickening clusters. Yes, the long calm was departing. A low advancing hum was soon heard, and then, like to the tumultuous masses of block ice, when the great river Hudson breaks up in spring, The entire host of whales came tumbling upon their inner center, as if to pile themselves up in one common mountain. Instantly, Starbuck and Quickwig changed places, Starbuck taking the stern.
Oars, oars!
He intensely whispered. Sorry.
Oars, oars!
He intensely whispered, seizing the helm.
Gripe your oars and clutch your souls now. My God, men! Stand by. Shove him off, you. Quick. The whale there. Prick him. Hit him. Stand up, and stay so. Spring, men. Pull, men. Never mind their backs. Scrape them. Scrape away.
The boat was now all but jammed between two vast black bulks, leaving a narrow Dardanelles between their long lengths. But, by desperate endeavor, we at last shot into a temporary opening, then giving way rapidly, and at the same time earnestly watching for another outlet. After many similar hair-breadth escapes, we at last swiftly glided into what had just been one of the outer circles, but now crossed by random whales, all violently making for one center. This lucky salvation was cheaply purchased by the loss of Quickwig's hat, who, while standing in the bows to pick the fugitive whales, had his hat taken clean from his head by the air eddy made by the sudden tossing of a pair of broad flukes close by. Riotous and disordered as the universal commotion now was, it soon resolved itself into what seemed a systematic movement. For having clumped together at last in one dense body, they then renewed their onward flight with augmented fleetness. Further pursuit was useless, but the boat still lingered in their wake to pick up what drugged whales might be dropped astern, and likewise to secure one which Flask had killed and waifed. The waif was a pennoned pole, 2 or 3 of which are carried by every boat, and which, when additional game is at hand, are inserted upright into the floating body of a dead whale, both to mark its place on the sea and also a token of prior possession, should the boats of any other ship draw near. The result of this lowering was somewhat illustrative of that sagacious saying in the fishery, the more whales, the less fish. Of all the drugged whales, only one was captured. The rest contrived to escape for the time, but only to be taken, as will hereafter be seen, but some other craft than the Picode. Done for today. I hope that was nice. Subscribe if you liked it, and I'll see you in the next video. I keep saying see you in the next video. It's like I'm watching a lot of YouTube these days. I think that's why, like, it's so common to hear YouTubers say see you in the next video. It got into my habit. But anyways, thank you for listening. I hope you liked it. And if you liked it, please do subscribe. Ha det bra.